begin with, I'm 87 years old. And as you can see, I have my sport jacket on and a tie. And I hope that makes me look more intelligent, or more suave, or something like that, at any rate. Erudite, those distinguished. Oh, thank you.
It looks like you.
Oh, thank you.
It looks like you.
I think that's a thank you.
Well, it's you, that's all I know.
You need a pipe.
At 87, it may be a contradiction in a way, but I hope that I am healthy and aware and die very rapidly when I go. Maybe from something like a stroke. However, I'll probably die frail and old. Most people do. And so perhaps I've been thinking about this topic for some time, and perhaps you can profit from my research and some of my ideas on how to deal with this kind of ending. Maybe we can thoughtfully prepare for a slowing down, for failing health. That may take months or years even to end. People don't like to talk about this subject. It's really a taboo topic. It's kind of a denial of a reality. And boy, there have been books written. One of the most famous ones, Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. Human beings have a special kind of frailty, and some of the frailty has to do with denying things that are so obvious, but we just do it. But just maybe we can think about it a bit and prepare for the inevitable. That's a large, perhaps a spectacular gain for us especially when we become most vulnerable. You know, people used to overstate their age. That's true. They used to overstate their age. The dignity of being old was something to which most people aspired. Elders had knowledge. They had wisdom. Now people turn to Google and the internet. Parents also used to provide the source of stability, advice, and economic protection. I'm talking about 50 years ago or so. We used to live 50 years, 100 years ago. We used to live close to our parents, close to our children, close to our grandparents and grandchildren. That's rare nowadays. Not anymore. Modernization demoted the family. That sounds peculiar, but it's true. Demoted the family and gave liberty and more emphasis on the individual. It's a trade-off, of course, between individualism, you know, a job elsewhere. So you have to move. And hey, there are now places to put elderly people. So there are trade-offs. And generally they're kind of fully accepted. However, realistically, some of the deficits, the defects of the trade-off are often neglected. And there are plenty. And let us look at some of them. Serious illness or infirmity can strike, and who is there to care if the family lives and works far away? However, for most people, life becomes a long, slow fade with broken bones, teeth that soften, blood vessels, joint, muscles, valves of the heart and lungs all pick up deposits of calcium and turn stiff. It's all as inevitable.
Inevitable.
Inevitable. Thank you, Kathy. As the sun will set, and with aging, the heart has to pump harder and stiffen blood vessels. By the year 80, we lose about a quarter to a half of our muscle strength. The brain shrinks. Boy, I'm told mine has shrunk. It shrinks, and especially the frontal lobes, this part right up in here, that's responsible for judgment and complex thinking. And the hippocampus also shrinks significantly, and that's responsible for a lot of memory and processing. So, you know, in ancient times, in the time of the Roman Empire, the average age of death was about 28 and a half. Woo-wee. In the United States now it's about 78 in the United States.
Is that because of battle or because they were just not living healthy?
Oh boy. Medicine, you know, was not as advanced. Poverty was greater. Food was not as good. Plagues would strike. All different kinds of reasons.
So not just war.
Yeah.
But we're going down in the United States, right? We're not living as long as other countries due to our health care.
That's true. That's true. We have a shorter lifespan than most of the Scandinavian countries, for instance.
Other industrial countries because of our health care.
The opioid situation will also affect it.
Yeah.
Is what?
The opioid situation.
They have better health care, but in addition, there's more of a sense of community. The differences between the haves and the have-nots is not as strong as it is in the United States. And that makes a difference. That makes a difference. Where was I?
Life expectancy.
Okay. Well, this is pretty ugly stuff, so we need a break. I went to my physician and I said, I think maybe I have some memory problems. So what do you think? And I ran some tests and he says, you're right. You do have many memory problems. And it's because you're old now. And I said, I want a second opinion. He said, okay, you're stupid too. Okay. At several points in my career as a psychologist, I spent time studying and treating an elder population. I taught a developmental psychology course that talked about aging. I visited nursing homes and assisted living places. I aided staff and sometimes families in planning for the elderly. I later became a forensic psychologist and evaluated elders in their home and helped to decide whether they were competent enough to remain at home. God, what a burden that was, to think through. But it needed to be done. I tried to help people remain at home. I can remember one guy, he was about 80, and Senior Service was concerned about him, the Department of Senior Services. They were concerned about him. This was in Maine, and he lived alone. I visited his home. Oh, it looked trashy. There were clothes scattered around on the floor. It was pretty unclean. He didn't have running water. He went to a restaurant nearby to get water and to wash up in the morning. And there was rotten food in his refrigerator, and it was like all the worry. Well, hey, what did we do? Instead of sending him off someplace, I was able to arrange for Senior Services to visit him a couple times a week to talk with him. There was a health provider there who did some of that. We got some people to come in and clean once about every 2 weeks. And we did a lot of other things to help. Oh, we introduced him to a senior center where he could get a meal. We had Meals on Wheels visiting him, and his life changed. He was able to stay there. I don't know for how long, but he was able to stay for a significant time. And that was to the good. It also saved the state some money, I also visited state facilities. I think they're probably much the same. Maybe they've changed a little bit. Maybe. State facilities for elderly people. When I visited, there was a long hallway, and the elderly people sat in chairs right along the hallway, one after the other. Most of them didn't talk to each other. There were moans and groans. Some were tied to the chair so that they wouldn't fall out. Staff came around regularly and watched for anyone who might have soiled themselves, and they would get attention. And what would happen would be they'd pick them up, they'd get them up, they would take them into another room, they would change them, and they would say things like, oh, Mr. Jones, please try and tell us beforehand if you need to go to the bathroom. Please spend some time and do that, and we won't have to go through all of this. What was happening, interestingly, was that they got attention when they peed their pants or pooped. They got attention that they didn't get otherwise. A lot of people were fed because they couldn't deal with the utensils. And it was a sorry situation. I had a lot of power though. And I got a program going, an educational program for nurses and the attendants. The attendants were the guys that dealt with all of the mess. The feeding and the changing of clothes and so forth. And so, had an education program for them. And what did we do? We dealt with we talked about Skinner and when it's a good idea to reward someone. We talked about, hey, spending a couple minutes with each elderly person who had not wet themselves or pooped themselves, every hour or every half an hour at the beginning. Spend some time with them when they hadn't done anything. And, the Skinnerian approach is, hey, after that works for a while, you can make it maybe 3/4 of an hour. But spend time with them when they're doing good. And this is in a rural area, and people had farms and gardens. I got a garden started outside. And some of the elderly could get out there and work. We instituted some doors that you had to turn one doorknob this way and the other this way, and you could get out. That meant the people who were kind of competent could go out and work in the garden when they wanted to, and come back in. Now, not all people, that didn't work for everyone, but that was another kind of little wrinkle. We began a senior eating program where utensils and even nice linen was put on the table. And people could talk, those who could talk with each other, who had the ability to do so, and make some kind of contact friendship. Hey, we started that. We changed the seating arrangements for many people. I wasn't able to do it for all, but we changed the seating arrangements. For those who were more competent, we put them in a room with card tables, and they were seated around card tables and could make contact with friends. Talking became more prominent, at least with a goodly number of people. As a matter of fact, one of the things that occurred was we had 20 patients who were able to return back to their community because we demonstrated that give them a chance and they could demonstrate some competency. And by the way, unfortunately, rotten things, most people who entered the state facility, they may have had good eating habits, they may have been talking with people. 3 weeks, 4 weeks afterward, they were hardly talking at all. Instead, they were moaning. And their eating habits deteriorated. They were neglected. They had no purpose in life. They lost identity. They lost just about everything that's important. I think it is especially important to help people maintain and have a purpose in life. This can be aiding with a grandchild's care. It can be working in a vegetable garden, growing some vegetables. It can be petting the dog, a purpose in life. Hey, Here's someone that's coming up to you and wants to be petted. You pet the dog. It can be making contacts at a senior center. It can mean new friendships. Old age is a continual series of losses, like hearing. God, my hearing has deteriorated a great deal. Memory. My short-term memory is not nearly as good as it was a while back. Old age also is loss in friends. I had 3 best male friends in my life, and they're all dead. And I had a goodly number of ladies in my life who are dead now too. I still have my best friend who lives right next door. I made sure.
Not to mention the one who lives with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I said,
No, his eyes did. His eyes went to her when he said that. I was watching. His eyes went there, and something else came out of his mouth to talk about this woman that he's told us about before.
I said to my best friend, look, I have enough property here. I'm going to give you some property. Will you build a house? She said, okay. So she lives right next door. You know, many of our MDs, they're supposed to be specialists in a variety of areas. Many of them know very little about old age. Did you know that 97% of all medical students take no course in geriatrics? And there are hardly any geriatric physicians. They're exceedingly rare. People don't want to go into that field. You want to deal with elderly people who are dying? What's the matter with you? Oh boy. Nursing homes. Yeah. Nursing homes and assisted living facilities are ubiquitous. But residents of both of these have a common complaint. The common complaint is, it ain't like home. Placement in these kinds of facilities means giving up a life built over a lifetime, over decades. You know, those kind of facilities, the nursing homes, the assisted living, they were created to clean out hospitals. It's too expensive to keep people in hospitals. Where can they go? Those are the kinds of places that they created. Typically, not always, but typically, privacy and personal control are gone. And the authorities decide, the administration decides who the residents live with, and residents are typically not asked for input on that. A famous sociologist by the name of Irving Goffman, some of you may have heard of him. He has written extensively about the military, hospitals, and a variety of institutions, mental hospitals, prisons. He said all people are treated alike, required to do basically the same things together, and activities are rigidly scheduled. Such places lack privacy, friendships, and purpose to the days. How could we make life worth living when we become weak and frail and can't fend for ourselves anymore? Okay. One approach. The family is one typical alternative if it works out. It can work if one family member, if you're old and frail, if one family member can stay home, or if there's a nice senior center nearby, and if they have some way of picking people up, maybe. And if the senior center has some nursing services like medication management, some seniors don't. Some senior centers don't have that. But, you know, for many older people, boy, they forget their meds. What am I supposed to have with food? I don't know. You know, and they'll get worse rapidly. So, you need some kind of nursing aid to make sure that medications are handled. And you need the family willing and able and want to keep the aged person at home on weekends, perhaps, and in the evenings. You know, priorities change as you age. And here's a kind of nexus of my talk. Priorities change as you age. When you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and even 50s. Expansion, growth, having a wide assortment of friends, doing many different things, going to Scotland, canoeing, whatever. And that's part of growth and excitement. But as you age, sometime after 50, certainly after 60, your priorities and goals shift. Priorities become more conservation of what you have. They become more being rather than doing. They become more survival oriented. Maintaining friendships, yeah. Maintaining. But not as much developing the new ones. We interact with fewer people, concentrate on family and established friends, and focus on being rather than doing, on the present rather than the future. Let me just repeat that because it is important. As you get older, in your 60s, we interact with fewer people, concentrate on family more, and established friends. Focus on being rather than doing, and on the present rather than the future. As we age, we realize much more how finite our time is, our time in this world. That reduced focus on self-fulfillment, on wide social contexts, It's in part because of mental decline and physical decline. And it's also in part because the world stops people from doing many things when they become old. Should you be driving still? I'm 87. Why do you want to do that? They ask. Okay. A survey of 1,500 assisted living facilities found that only 11% offered privacy and services that allowed frail people to remain. Assisted living, only 11% offered privacy and services that allowed frail people to remain. You can't stay in that kind of environment in most places. There are some, though, that you can. For instance, in those assisted living facilities, no one on the staff aided the elder to dress him or herself, because dressing them takes less time and it's easier. If you have to wait while somebody ties their shoes and so forth, and just stand around, you know, it's like, boy, that takes time. That costs money for staff. So because of time constraints and money constraints, you know, it's easier to take away some of your autonomy. Here, let me help you with that. Just being good-natured and helpful, yes.
That's the thing people do constantly, from with young kids on, adults want to help them
Yeah.
instead of allowing them to do it themselves, and they look at you like you're crazy when you ask them to, let the child do it,
Yeah,
do it, let me do, for me. I don't want people
yes,
doing things
exactly.
for me that I
exactly.
can do for myself. If I can't
Yes.
lift this up and put it in the car, are you gonna come home with me to take it out?
Yeah.
So,
Thank you,
But
thank
we
you for
don't
that,
buy
Jim.
that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
By the way, one just little nugget here that you've emphasized. Boy, if you're dealing with elderly people or want to be dealt with well, remind yourself of this. Don't do for somebody if they can do it for themselves. Respect their right to do things for themselves, even if they screw it up a bit. Boy, what happens if you're in a wheelchair and you're tied to it so you can't get up to go to the bathroom? Well, hey, but if you are allowed to get up, if you're not tied in, and you fall, and you break something, oh my God. In many places, that can't be allowed. But in some, it is allowed. You're allowed to make mistakes, even if it hurts you, in some places. I'm passionate about this topic, aren't I? It's because I'm worried.
So it might be something to discuss later, because I don't wanna take your time, but how do we know whether to offer assistance to someone or not?
I'd say start by asking them, showing respect.
So it's okay to ask?
I don't understand that. I'm totally puzzled why you would say is it okay to ask somebody something. I mean, this
And
is
there's
just
nothing-
basic. To me,
There's
that's
nothing
basic
wrong
common
with
sense.
saying, hey, if you need help, let me know.
Yeah.
Cool, that's it.
So that's
Some
that's
people-
not insulting to say.
Some people get offended even if you're asking them.
That's the point.
Again, you
But like
cannot control what somebody else is going to think
Right,
or do.
right.
You can't do that.
They ask you to, if you want help with your groceries,
get offended when you turn them down.
Right.
I see
Okay,
it
so
different.
it goes both ways. I'm gonna offend you if I don't want you to help me and I tell you no, and you wanna get offended, it's your problem, not mine.
I see the difference, thank you.
Now, here's another little thing to keep in mind. We want autonomy for ourselves, choices for ourselves, even if it's somehow a mistake. We tend to want safety for those that we love. And that's unfortunate. That's kind of one of those knotty issues.
A third of us in here are over 70. I just counted. I think there are 14 or 15 people, and there are 5 of us. And there's maybe more because I don't know everybody's
I'm
name, but
only
I know.
68, Gene.
I'm sorry?
I'm only 68.
I didn't count you, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
That's true.
okay? Math is not bad.
Okay, I want to focus for a minute on getting to the better part of planning. Here's one experiment with a different kind of assisted living. The staff and administration introduced plants in all the rooms. 2 cats and 2 dogs on every floor. Birds in cages in every room. Kids from nearby were invited to visit, and there was an aftercare program for kids, and kids did come. A vegetable garden that residents could work in was prepared. Results of that kind of experiment: prescriptions fell by about a half. Drug prescriptions fell by about a half. Drug costs dropped by 38%. People started speaking who had not talked before. Even the death rate fell by 15%. Ooh-wee. Birds and dogs and cats and plants and, hey, people had more of a reason to live. Even with simple things like a dog, a pet, and a cat that come up and sit in your lap. We need more social engineering. One other example is a place called Newbridge on the Charles. This is in Boston. They have a senior living center there that had pods. And this is an interesting idea. The pod had no more than 16 people, men and women. All residents had a private room. There was a common living room, a kitchen, dining room, and an activity room. The front door had a bell and it wasn't locked. They tried to avoid the feeling of a clinical setting. What were the results? They found that socialization increased. Many had new friendships, and they were formed. Residents were not confined, like tied to a wheelchair, even though they might fall. You know, residents said things like, "I can go to the bathroom by myself now." Residents got to make poor choices if that was their inclination. In other words, each resident could be the author of their own life. People could go to bed and get up when they wanted. Now there are over 150 such, what they call them sometimes greenhouses. Now there are over 150 that was as of about 4 years ago. They're growing, those kind of things are growing. And boy, if you're looking at getting old and frail, you might want to check up on that kind of thing.
I think sometimes the question is affordability.
Is what?
Affordability.
Affordability, yes it is, yes it is. You're
That's why
absolutely
Medicare for
right.
all is what we ought to be working on. Simple as that.
Of course, for the terminally
Not
ill,
us.
things like ventilators and drug drips and so forth come into play. And meds frequently are given to dull consciousness. And for that group, you know, there is really a poor quality of life. What are the major concerns of people who are near the end of life? Here's 5 of them, and I think they're the major ones. Near the end of life, what do you want? What are your concerns? 1, to avoid suffering. Yeah, avoid the pain. That's right. Second, keep up relationships with family and friends. Third, be mentally alert. Not so drugged up that you can't understand what's going on, can't read, can't talk with people. But another concern, the 4th, not be a burden on others. And the 5th, this is according to, by the way, Otto Wandi, who's written a book, Being Mortal. It's a great book. The 5th one is achieve a sense that life is complete. That's a strange one. But it has to do with each of us has a narrative about what our life is about. We may not be able to clearly explain that, but we have it. You know, it may be something like life is about keeping up friendships and making sure that you go out and see the people that are important to you. It may be about making sure that you have some of the little pleasures all the time, making sure that you have them. Maybe it's a favorite food. Maybe it's watching a comedy show. Maybe it's their individual little pleasures. Maybe it's getting a massage. Yeah.
Who was this author? Otto somebody?
Atul, A-T-U-L, Gawande, G-W-A-N